History is not a story written in stone, but a puzzle missing half its pieces. We are about to explore 25 archaeological discoveries that forced historians to rewrite the textbooks. By the end, you will see the entire timeline of human civilization in a startling new light. What if a temple complex predates farming by thousands of years? And what secret does a 2,000-year-old bronze machine hold? Each of these finds proves our past is far more mysterious and interconnected than any single narrative allows. What part of the human story do you think is still waiting to be found? But this established timeline was always built on a fragile foundation. For generations, our story of humanity was written not in the dirt, but in the books that survived the ages. Looked to the great classical texts from Greece and Rome, to the chronicles of ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia, and they saw a clear path. The narrative suggested a neat, upward climb from simple beginnings. First came hunting and gathering, then the revolutionary spark of agriculture, followed by villages, then cities, and finally the grand achievements of writing, metalwork, and monumental architecture. This model placed a handful of river valleys as the sole cradles of civilization, implying that all human progress flowed from these few sources. It is a powerful story, one that shapes how we see our own place in history, as thinkers like Yuval Noah Harari have explored. We inherit a map that tells us who was first, who was advanced, and by extension, who led and who followed. Yet archaeology operates in a different language altogether. It speaks in stones, in soil layers, in fragments of pottery and traces of ancient hearths. This physical evidence does not care for the stories written by the victors centuries later. It simply is, and time and again, as spades break ground in unexpected places, what emerges from the earth tells a radically different tale. It suggests a world where brilliant ideas sparked independently across the globe, where complex societies may have risen and fallen long before our textbooks say they could, and where the very definition of civilization needs to be rewritten. This is the profound disruption we are about to witness. Each discovery on our list is a key that unlocks a door historians never knew was there, revealing rooms in the vast mansion of human history that have been closed for millennia. The first crack in that neat historical timeline appeared in the rolling hills of southeastern Turkey. Here, in a place known as Göbekli Tepe, archaeologists uncovered something that should not have existed. It was the 1990s when researchers began to understand the true scale of what they had found. This was not a simple settlement or a burial ground. It was a series of monumental stone circles, each one defined by enormous, finely carved T-shaped pillars, some weighing more than 10 tons. The artistry was staggering, with the limestone surfaces adorned with elaborate reliefs of foxes, cranes, scorpions, and lions. These were not crude markings, they were the work of master craftsmen, executed with a clear symbolic purpose, and the date was the real shock. Through careful analysis, the site was placed at around 9,600 years before the Common Era. That is over 6,000 years older than Stonehenge, and a staggering 7,000 years before the Great Pyramids of Giza were even a thought. At this point in history, according to every textbook, humans were supposed to be small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers, focused solely on survival. The established theory was clear and logical. Only after the invention of agriculture, which provided a stable food surplus, could people afford the time and social organization to build grand monuments and develop complex religions. Göbekli Tepe turned that logic completely on its head. The people who built this breathtaking complex were not farmers. There is no evidence of domesticated plants or animals at the site during its main period of use. They were hunter-gatherers, yet they somehow coordinated the labor to quarry, transport, and erect these colossal stones, and they did so with a shared artistic and spiritual vision. The late archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, who led the excavations, called it the first human-built holy place. This single site forces a monumental rethink. It suggests that the human drive to create meaning, to gather for ritual purposes, and to express collective identity through monumental art may have been the spark that lit the fire of civilization. Perhaps it was not farming that created religion and complex society. Perhaps it was the powerful pull of shared belief and communal ceremony that first brought people together in large, organized groups, which then created the need for a more reliable food source, thereby incentivizing agriculture. Göbekli Tepe stands as a silent, stone testament to a profound truth. Our ancestors' minds were capable of abstract thought, sophisticated art, and large-scale cooperation long before we ever gave them credit. This discovery does not just add a new chapter to prehistory, it rewrites the introduction to the entire human story. Göbekli Tepe shattered our understanding of humanity's earliest chapters, but the next discovery rewrites the final pages of the classical world. In the year 1901, sponge divers exploring a shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera brought up a collection of artifacts. Among the statues and pottery was a lump of heavily corroded bronze about the size of a large book. It seemed unremarkable, a curious but broken relic, and it sat in a museum storage room for decades. Then researchers began to look closer. Using advanced imaging techniques like X-ray and later three-dimensional modeling, they peered inside the calcified mass. What they saw was breathtaking. This was not a simple ornament or tool. It was an intricate machine, a clockwork device of at least 30 interlocking bronze gears, precisely cut and mounted within a wooden frame. Inscriptions on its casing served as a user manual detailing its functions. This object, now known as the Antikythera mechanism, was an ancient analog computer. Dated to around 100 years before the Common Era, its purpose was to model the cosmos. By turning a hand crank, one could calculate the positions of the sun, moon, and known planets, predict lunar and solar eclipses, and even track the cycles of athletic games like the ancient Olympics. The sophistication of its gearing, including a differential gear previously thought to have been invented in the 16th century, is astounding. It represents a level of mechanical engineering that historians believed was impossible for its time, a technology that would not be seen again in Europe until the elaborate astronomical clocks of the 18th century. The historian Derek de Solla Price, who dedicated years to its study, called it more valuable than the Mona Lisa. Its very existence is a profound anomaly. It forces us to confront a glaring gap in the historical record. The Antikythera mechanism was not a one-off experiment. It is too refined, too perfectly executed. It implies a lost tradition of high-precision engineering and astronomical knowledge in the Hellenistic world, a school of thought and craftsmanship that has left almost no other trace. We must ask, what else did they know? What other marvels of technology, perhaps made of perishable materials like wood, were lost when libraries burned and empires fell? This single artifact, rescued from the seafloor, bridges a chasm we did not know existed. It connects the philosophical and mathematical genius of ancient Greece with a tangible, mechanical ingenuity, suggesting that the path of science and technology is not a straight, upward line, but a story with forgotten peaks and devastating valleys. While the Antikythera mechanism reveals a forgotten peak of ancient technology, our next discovery is a document shrouded in modern mystery, one that challenges the very map of the known world. It is called the Vinland map. This is not an object pulled from the earth, but a parchment that surfaced in the mid-20th century, bearing a sketch of the world that seemed impossibly ahead of its time. Drawn in the style of a medieval European chart, it shows not just Europe, Africa, and Asia, but also a large island in the distant Western Atlantic, labeled in Latin as Vinland. According to the sagas, Vinland was the name Norse explorers gave to parts of North America after Leif Erikson's voyages around the year 1000. If this map was genuine, created in the 15th century, it would mean that knowledge of these distant lands was circulating in European scholarly circles decades before Christopher Columbus ever set sail. You can almost picture the scene in a quiet scriptorium, a monk or cartographer carefully dipping his pen, integrating these incredible tales from northern seafarers into the established geography of the day. The implications would be monumental, forcing a complete rewrite of the pre-Columbian narrative, but from the moment it appeared, the map was met with intense suspicion. The quest to verify it turned into a detective story spanning decades, pulling in experts from fields like chemistry and physics. Radiocarbon dating of the parchment placed it in the correct period, around the 1400s. Yet analysis of the ink told a more complicated story. Researchers discovered traces of a synthetic compound called anatase titanium dioxide, a substance not commercially available until the 1920s. This finding pointed strongly toward a modern forgery, an elaborate hoax designed to rewrite history for profit or fame. Other scholars have contested these findings, leading to a fierce and ongoing academic debate. But here is the fascinating part. Even if the Vinland map is ultimately proven to be a fake, its very existence and the controversy it sparked have profoundly impacted historical discourse. It forced historians to rigorously re-examine the Norse sagas and the scattered archaeological evidence, like the confirmed Norse site at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland. It highlighted how desperately we want to find a single, definitive piece of evidence that overturns a historical consensus, and how that desire can sometimes cloud our judgment. The map serves as a powerful reminder that evidence must withstand the most rigorous scrutiny, and that the story of discovery is often a story of doubt, debate, and scientific conflict. It asks us a crucial question. What level of proof is required to officially redraw the maps in our history books? This uncertainty makes the next discoveries all the more compelling, for they are written not in contested ink, but in the undeniable language of stone and bone. A world of ideas can be hidden in the most barren of places. In the stark, sun-baked cliffs overlooking the Dead Sea, a young Bedouin shepherd searching for a lost goat in 1947 made a find that would echo through the centuries. He tossed a stone into a small cave opening, expecting to hear it hit the ground. Instead, he heard the distinct sound of shattering pottery. Climbing inside, he discovered several tall clay jars, and within them, bundles of old leather and papyrus. Unwittingly, he had uncovered the first of what we now call the Dead Sea Scrolls. This accidental discovery ignited a decade-long search of nearby caves, ultimately recovering thousands of fragments and nearly 1,000 complete scrolls from 11 different hiding places. These were not just any old texts. They were ancient Jewish religious writings, copied between the 3rd century before the Common Era and the 1st century of the Common Era. Their age was the first monumental shock. Before this discovery, the oldest complete Hebrew manuscripts of biblical books dated to around the 10th century, a full 1,000 years more recent. Suddenly, scholars had a time capsule, a direct textual window into a pivotal era known as the Second Temple period. The scrolls contained copies of every book of the Hebrew Bible except Esther, along with commentaries, hymns, community rules, and apocalyptic visions. As scholars like Jezza Vermes dedicated their lives to the painstaking work of piecing together and translating these fragments, a new picture of ancient religious life emerged. The scrolls revealed a landscape of remarkable diversity. They showed that there was not one single, monolithic version of Judaism at the time, but a vibrant tapestry of groups with differing interpretations and practices, all grappling with questions of law, ritual, and the coming of a messianic age. For biblical scholarship, the impact was profound. The scrolls demonstrated that the textual transmission of these sacred books over a millennium had been incredibly faithful for the most part, a finding that brought a new layer of historical confidence. Yet they also contained fascinating variations, alternate phrasings, and even previously unknown psalms, proving that the biblical text had a living, dynamic history before it became standardized. This physical library, preserved by the dry desert air, did more than just push a timeline back. It forced a complete reevaluation of the intellectual and spiritual soil from which both rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity grew. It showed that the ideas that shaped Western civilization were forged in a crucible of intense debate and exploration. The scrolls ask us a humbling question. How much of our understanding of faith and history is based on the fragile, fragmented evidence that happens to survive? They are a powerful reminder that our deepest beliefs are often connected to the most tangible of objects, a piece of leather in a clay jar, waiting in the dark for its story to be told again. The power of language to conceal and reveal is nowhere more evident than in a slab of dark stone pulled from the mud of the Nile Delta. In July of 1799, French soldiers rebuilding a fort near the town of Rosetta during Napoleon's Egyptian campaign unearthed a broken but massive granodiorite stele. Its surface was covered in writing, but not just one kind. It bore 3 distinct scripts carved in parallel bands. At the bottom was ancient Greek, a language scholars could already read. In the middle was Demotic, the common script of everyday Egyptian life, and at the top were the elegant pictorial symbols of sacred hieroglyphs, a writing system whose meaning had been utterly lost for over 1,000 years. The stone itself was a royal decree from 196 years before the Common Era, establishing the divine cult of the young pharaoh Ptolemy V. Its mundane bureaucratic purpose, however, belied its earth-shaking potential. For the first time, researchers had a clear parallel text, a linguistic key. The race was on to use the known Greek to unlock the unknown Egyptian. The task fell to a French linguistic prodigy named Jean-François Champollion. For over 2 decades, he and other scholars wrestled with the puzzle, battling national rivalries and false leads. The breakthrough came in September of 1822. Champollion, building on the work of the English physicist Thomas Young, realized that hieroglyphs were not solely pictographic, where a lion symbol meant only lion. They were a complex hybrid system that also included phonetic signs, where symbols could represent sounds, much like an alphabet. The moment of realization must have been electric. The beautiful, mysterious symbols that had adorned tombs and temples for millennia suddenly transformed from silent art into a readable language, a direct voice from the past. The effect on history was immediate and profound. Before the Rosetta Stone, ancient Egypt was a magnificent silhouette. Its timeline was pieced together from fragmented king lists and the often second-hand accounts of Greek and Roman historians like Herodotus. Its stories were mythologized, its chronology a best guess. Now, historians could read the original source material. They could translate temple inscriptions, administrative records, and religious texts written by the Egyptians themselves. This allowed them to reconstruct a precise chronology of dynasties, correct errors in the classical accounts, and understand the true sequence of events, from the reigns of great pharaohs like Ramesses II to the intricacies of daily life and governance. The Rosetta Stone is the ultimate testament to how a single, fortuitous find can become a portal to an entire civilization. It proves that history is not just written in events and artifacts, but in language. Without the ability to read the words of a people, their inner world, their laws, their prayers, their jokes, their fears remains forever locked away. This monumental decipherment forces us to wonder what other chapters of the human story are currently sealed shut, waiting for their own key. Which ancient scripts, like the still undeciphered linear, are of the Minoans or the enigmatic Indus Valley script, hold narratives that could redraw our maps of trade, belief, and power. The stone reminds us that understanding often hinges not on a grand battle or a royal tomb, but on a quiet, persistent linguistic breakthrough. The Rosetta Stone gave us the language of pharaohs, but a discovery in China revealed their ambition rendered in silent, breathtaking scale. In March of 1974, farmers digging a well near the city of Xi'an struck something hard. It was not rock or water, but the head of a life-sized clay soldier staring back from the dark earth after more than 2,000 years. This accidental find led to the unearthing of one of archaeology's greatest spectacles, the terracotta army of China's first emperor, Qin Shi Huang. The sheer scale of the discovery is almost impossible to grasp from a photograph. Imagine standing at the edge of a vast subterranean hall, your flashlight beam sweeping across not a few dozen statues, but thousands upon thousands of life-sized warriors, each one distinct. There are infantrymen, archers, cavalry officers, and charioteers, arranged in precise military formation. Their faces are individualized with different hairstyles, expressions, and ranks indicated by their detailed armor and uniforms. They once held real bronze weapons, swords, and spears that were still sharp when found. This was not a symbolic token force. It was a complete, meticulously crafted replica of an imperial army, buried in massive pits to protect the emperor in the afterlife. The historical shockwave came not just from the art, but from the logistics. Historians knew Qin Shi Huang as the ruthless unifier of China, the man who standardized writing, currency, and measurements, and began the early walls that would become the Great Wall. The ancient texts spoke of his grand tomb complex, but they were often read as exaggeration, the boastful chronicles of a later age. The terracotta army was the physical proof. It forced a complete reassessment of the Qin dynasty's capabilities. To create an estimated 8,000 soldiers, plus horses and chariots, required a staggering mobilization of human and material resources. Scholars believe over 700,000 conscripted workers labored for nearly 40 years. This was a level of centralized state control, bureaucratic organization, and artistic mass production that historians had not fully credited to such an early period. It pushed the timeline of Chinese imperial power and artistic sophistication dramatically forward. Each soldier began as local clay, crafted in workshops using an assembly line process where heads, limbs, and torsos were molded separately and then assembled with the fine details added by hand. The result is an army of individuals, a profound expression of belief that blended military might with spiritual duty. This find does more than fill a museum. It makes abstract concepts like imperial ideology and funerary practice stunningly tangible. It asks us, how does a society marshal such a colossal effort? What belief was so powerful that it commanded the labor of generations? The silent terracotta legion stands as a monument to one man's vision and the organized might of an early state, challenging us to measure ancient achievement not just by texts, but by the earth moved and the clay shaped by countless forgotten hands. The silent legions of China were built by imperial command, but halfway across the world, another civilization carved its ambition from the living rock of a remote island, creating a mystery that would be misunderstood for centuries. On the grassy slopes of Rapa Nui, known to the world as Easter Island, stand the colossal stone figures called Moai. These monolithic giants, with their heavy brows and elongated features, gaze inland with a silent, imposing presence. Carved by the Rapa Nui people between roughly 1250 and 1500 of the Common Era, they have long been the centerpiece of a tragic parable. The traditional story, popularized for decades, goes like this. A once thriving society, obsessed with statue construction, cut down every last palm tree to move their massive creations, triggering catastrophic soil erosion. This ecological suicide led to famine, warfare, and a total societal collapse, leaving only the silent stone witnesses as a warning to all humanity about environmental recklessness. It is a compelling, cautionary tale, but according to a wave of recent archaeological research, it is almost certainly wrong. The new evidence paints a picture not of reckless folly, but of remarkable resilience and ingenious adaptation. Analysis of the island's soil chemistry has revealed something startling. The Rapa Nui people practiced a form of sustainable lithic mulching, deliberately breaking volcanic rock and mixing it into the soil. This technique conserved moisture, enriched the earth with nutrients, and allowed them to cultivate sweet potatoes, taro, and bananas in a challenging environment. They were not stripping their land bare, they were intensively and intelligently gardening it. The question of how the statues were moved has also been radically reinterpreted. The old theory involved elaborate log rollers from the vanished forests, but experimental archaeology led by researchers like Caral-Supe and Terry Hunt proposed a far simpler, more elegant solution. Picture a community effort, not a desperate, resource-draining slog. Teams using strong ropes could have walked the multi-ton statues upright, rocking them side to side in a coordinated motion, much like moving a heavy refrigerator by tipping it from one corner to the next. This walking method would have required no timber, just skill, coordination, and communal song or chant to keep the rhythm. This changes everything. It suggests the statue construction was not the cause of a collapse, but a central, unifying activity for a society that understood its limits and worked within them. The societal decline that did occur later appears linked not to self-inflicted ecological disaster, but to the arrival of Europeans who brought devastating new illnesses and the trauma of the slave trade. The real story of the Moai, then, is one of adaptation. It forces historians to abandon simplistic narratives of ecological suicide and consider the profound capacity for resilience in isolated cultures. The Rapa Nui people were not a civilization that failed. They were a civilization that succeeded for centuries against the odds, expressing their identity and spiritual beliefs in stone on a grand scale until outside forces intervened. This discovery asks us a vital question. How many other historical tales of collapse are actually stories of adaptation cut short by external shocks we have failed to fully account for? The silent giants of Rapa Nui no longer warn us of inevitable self-destruction. Instead, they stand as enduring testaments to human ingenuity and collective effort, challenging us to listen more carefully to the subtle evidence left in the soil. Resilience on a remote island is one thing, but the foundations of an entire civilization emerging from a desert valley is another. In the arid Supe Valley of Peru, a discovery in the 1990s would permanently alter the map of early human achievement. This is the ancient city of Caral, or Caral-Supe, a sprawling complex of pyramids, plazas, and residential quarters that radiates a sense of profound order. Its calibrated radiocarbon dates tell a story that stunned archaeologists. This city was flourishing around 2,600 years before the Common Era. That makes it a contemporary of the Great Pyramids of Giza in Egypt, yet here it was on the other side of the world, developing in complete isolation. For decades, the dominant narrative held that civilization was essentially invented once, in the Fertile Crescent of Mesopotamia, and its ideas slowly diffused outward to other regions. Caral shattered that assumption. Here was a complex urban society that arose entirely on its own terms, in the challenging environment of a Peruvian desert, fed not by a mighty river like the Nile or the Tigris, but by a network of springs and carefully managed irrigation from the Supe River. The scale of the architecture is breathtaking. The site is dominated by a massive central pyramid, known as the Pyramid of the Sun, which stands nearly 100 feet tall and required the movement of immense quantities of stone and earth. Surrounding it are other platform mounds, sunken circular plazas, and distinct residential sectors for both elite and commoners, all laid out with clear intentionality. The archaeologist Ruth Shady, who led the pioneering excavations, pieced together a picture of a highly organized theocratic society, one that seemed to value cooperation over conflict. Remarkably, excavations have uncovered no fortifications, no weapons, and no evidence of warfare. Instead, they found musical instruments made of bone and cane, and evidence of large-scale feasting and ritual. This suggests a social glue based on shared belief, trade, and communal ceremony rather than coercion. Furthermore, Caral existed without a key technology we often associate with early settled life, pottery. They used gourds and woven baskets. This fact alone forces a radical rethink of what is necessary for civilization to begin. It proves that the package of traits we associate with complex society, urban planning, monumental architecture, social stratification, and organized religion does not have a fixed recipe. Caral-Supe developed its own formula, one that prioritized collective labor and spiritual expression. This discovery does not just add an earlier date to Andean history. It pushes the timeline for complex society in the Americas back by over 1,000 years and places the Andes as one of the world's original, independent cradles of civilization, alongside Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, and China. It answers a profound question about human nature. When conditions allow, do groups of people naturally tend toward social complexity and monumental expression, no matter where they are? Caral suggests that the drive to build, organize, and create meaning is a universal human potential, waiting to emerge in valleys across the globe. The ingenuity of ancient societies often hides in plain sight, within objects so ordinary we mistake them for simple tools. In the outskirts of modern Baghdad, during excavations in the 1930s, workers uncovered a small, unassuming clay jar, roughly the size of a man's fist. Inside it, they found a rolled copper sheet forming a cylinder, and within that, an iron rod. The jar's opening was sealed with an asphalt plug, which also held the rod in place, perfectly insulated from the copper. Dated to the Parthian or Sasanian era, somewhere between 250 years before the Common Era and 250 years after, this odd assembly was catalogued and stored away. It was only years later that a researcher looked at it with a new perspective and posed a startling question. What if this was not a container for scrolls or spices, but a primitive battery? The arrangement is eerily familiar to anyone who has seen a basic school science project. If the jar were filled with an acidic liquid, like vinegar or fermented grape juice, a chemical reaction would occur between the two different metals, generating a small but measurable electric current. The voltage would be low, perhaps 1 or 2 volts, but it would be consistent. This object, now famously called the Baghdad Battery, presents a historical puzzle wrapped in a clay jar. The immediate and tantalizing possibility is electroplating. Imagine an ancient artisan's workshop, not so different from a modern jeweler's bench. A small statue of silver needs a delicate layer of gold. Using a series of these jars connected together, they could produce enough current to suspend gold particles in a solution and bond them to the silver surface through electrolysis, creating a gilded finish. This was a technology historians believed was invented in the 19th century. Could it have been discovered, used as a craft secret, and then lost for over a millennium? Other theories suggest more subtle uses. The mild shock from such a device might have been employed in medical practices, perhaps for the therapeutic numbing of a specific area, a concept recorded in some ancient Greek and Roman texts regarding the use of electric fish. The controversy among scholars is deep and ongoing. Skeptics offer compelling alternative explanations. The jar could have been a sacred storage vessel for a religious scroll, with the metal components serving a purely ritualistic or structural purpose. The acidic residue needed to prove the battery theory has never been conclusively found. Yet, even if we accept the skeptical view, the artifact loses none of its power to provoke. Its very design, whether intentional or accidental, demonstrates a physical principle. It forces historians to confront a vital truth about the ancient world. Our knowledge of their technological capabilities is limited to what was written down on durable materials and what has physically survived. Countless everyday techniques, the practical kitchen science and workshop tricks passed from master to apprentice, have vanished without a written trace. The Baghdad battery, real or not, serves as a crucial reminder. It asks us to look at the artifacts in museum cases not as final answers, but as open questions. What other objects, dismissed as ritual items or storage pots, might hold the ghost of a forgotten understanding? It suggests that the timeline of discovery is not a straight line from ignorance to enlightenment, but a scattered landscape where insights flicker in and out of view, waiting for a modern mind to recognize a pattern seen once, long ago, in the dim light of a workshop. That ancient clay jar from Baghdad presents a timeless dilemma of preservation and loss. But what if the most vital thing to preserve is not a scroll or a charge of electricity, but the very source of life itself? High in the Arctic, on the remote Norwegian archipelago of Svalbard, a stark, angular structure is carved into a mountainside. This is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, a modern fortress designed to safeguard the world's agricultural diversity against any future catastrophe. Its mission feels uniquely contemporary, a product of our age of global awareness and genetic science. Yet this drive to secure our food future is not a modern invention at all. Archaeology has revealed that our ancestors were practicing their own form of seed banking, and their experiments began far earlier than we ever imagined. The evidence lies in places like Tel Abu Hurira, a site in modern-day Syria. Here, researchers sifting through layers of ancient settlement found something more revolutionary than any monument: the preserved remains of plants. Through meticulous analysis of these fragile seeds and grains, using tools like radiocarbon dating and scanning electron microscopes to study their morphology, a new story emerged. The inhabitants of Abu Hurira were not just collecting wild grasses around 11,000 years before the Common Era. They were beginning to select and cultivate them, favoring strains with traits that made them easier to harvest and more nutritious. Picture a Neolithic gatherer, not with a blueprint for civilization, but with a simple, profound observation. She notices that some stalks of wild rye hold their seeds tighter, that some lentils have a more desirable size. By choosing to sow these specific seeds near her settlement, she sets in motion a chain of consequences that will forever alter humanity's relationship with the earth. This was not an isolated event. Similar discoveries across the globe, from the rice paddies of China to the squash gardens of Mesoamerica, have painted a consistent picture. Agriculture did not erupt in a single brilliant flash in one cradle of civilization and then spread. It was a slow, patient light kindling independently in at least a dozen different regions, each with its own suite of plants, from wheat and barley to maize and potatoes. This forces a fundamental rethink of the so-called Neolithic revolution. Historians once depicted it as a dramatic turning point, a sudden leap from nomadic hunting to settled farming. The archaeological record now tells a story of gradual transition, a process stretching over thousands of years where communities practiced mixed strategies, blending foraging with early cultivation. This prolonged experimentation means our cultural timelines must stretch and bend. The development of permanent villages, social hierarchies, and complex belief systems did not follow agriculture in a neat sequence. They co-evolved with it in a slow dance of cause and effect. The act of saving the best seeds for next season required foresight and a commitment to place. It fostered new concepts of property, inheritance, and community planning. This discovery does more than push a date back. It highlights the deep, ancient roots of human environmental manipulation. Our ancestors were not passive children of nature. They were active participants, carefully observing, selecting, and shaping the living world around them to ensure their survival. The Svalbard Vault is a symbol of that legacy, a high-tech continuation of the most ancient human tradition, saving a seed for tomorrow. A single finger bone, no larger than a child's, rested in the frozen darkness of a Siberian cave for over 50,000 years. In the 2000s, in a laboratory far from the Denisovan cave where it was found, geneticist Svante Pääbo and his team performed a kind of modern alchemy. They extracted not just the story of one individual, but of an entire branch of the human family we never knew existed. This tiny fragment from a young girl researchers nicknamed Deni revealed she was a Denisovan, a distinct hominin group as different from us as Neanderthals, yet intimately connected to our own lineage. The DNA told a story far more complex than any fossil alone could. It showed that Denisovans not only coexisted with Neanderthals and our own Homo sapiens ancestors across Eurasia, but that they interbred with them. Traces of Denisovan DNA live on today in the genomes of modern populations across Asia and Oceania, influencing traits like adaptation to high altitude in Tibetan populations. This single genetic discovery shattered the classic linear model of human evolution, that tidy march of a single species improving from stooped ape to upright human. Instead, it revealed a vibrant, messy, interconnected web. For tens of thousands of years, multiple kinds of humans shared the planet, met, mingled, and exchanged genetic material. Our ancestry is not a pure, solitary line, but a braided stream woven from the legacy of several different groups. This forces a profound philosophical shift. What does it mean to be human if our biological inheritance is literally a mosaic patched together from other, now vanished forms of humanity? The Denisovan discovery, built on the revolutionary science of ancient DNA, expands the narrative from a simple family tree into a dense, overlapping forest. It suggests that the traits that allowed our species to ultimately thrive may not have been ours alone to begin with, but were shared, borrowed, and blended through these ancient encounters. The cold cave in Siberia did not just hold bones. It held a mirror, reflecting a past where we were not the only players on the stage, and challenging us to see our own identity as a collective, inherited story. Mythology often speaks in the language of metaphor, but sometimes it whispers in the precise geometry of stone. Offshore from the modern Indian coast of Gujarat, in the murky waters of the Gulf of Combat, a team from India's National Institute of Ocean Technology was conducting a routine pollution survey in 2001. Their sonar equipment pinged through the deep, not mapping trash, but something far more extraordinary. The images that returned to the surface revealed clear, geometric patterns on the seabed, about 120 feet below the waves. The shapes were unmistakably human-made, a grid of rectangles and right angles that nature does not create. Subsequent dredging brought up artifacts that sent shockwaves through the archaeological community, blocks of stone that appeared to be masonry, pottery shards, and even what seemed to be fossilized wood. The most startling claims came from carbon dating of some of these materials, suggesting they could be from as early as 7,500 years before the Common Era. If verified, this would not just be an old settlement. It would be a city older than any known in the subcontinent, predating the Great Indus Valley civilization by millennia. The name given to this potential site resonates with deep cultural memory, Dwarka. In Hindu sacred texts like the Mahabharata, Dwarka is described as the magnificent, fortified island city of Lord Krishna, a kingdom of immense splendor that was eventually consumed by the sea upon his departure from the world. For centuries, these accounts were read as powerful mythology, symbolic narratives of divine play and cosmic order. The sonar images and recovered artifacts now pose a tantalizing, almost unsettling question. Could these stories be a form of historical memory, a poetic retelling of a real place that was lost to rising waters at the end of the last ice age? The scenario plunges us into the challenging, silty waters of marine archaeology. Verification is exceptionally difficult. Strong currents, poor visibility, and the immense depth make traditional excavation a monumental task. Many academics urge extreme caution, pointing out that the recovered artifacts could have been displaced by ancient currents from elsewhere, or that the sonar patterns might have alternative geological explanations. The dating of materials retrieved from the seafloor, rather than from a sealed archaeological layer, is also hotly debated. Yet, even amidst this healthy scientific skepticism, the possibility forces a profound shift in perspective. It challenges historians to stop seeing myth and archaeology as separate realms, one of fiction and one of fact. Instead, we might view them as different channels transmitting the same signal. Oral traditions passed down through countless generations can act as a kind of cultural hard drive, preserving the memory of cataclysmic events, like a great flood or a sinking city, long after the physical evidence is submerged or eroded. The search for Dwarka, therefore, is about more than finding stones under the sea. It is about learning to listen to the stories we have always carried. How do we balance the rigorous demands of material evidence with the resonant power of legend? This discovery invites us to re-evaluate other legendary sites, from the possible inspirations for Plato's Atlantis to the biblical city of Jericho. It suggests that the timeline of human achievement may be recorded not only in carbon-dated layers, but in the epic poems sung around ancient fires, waiting for science to find the physical echo of their verse. The stories of sunken cities speak to a deep human fear of loss, but some monuments refuse to be forgotten, even when the civilization that made them vanishes entirely. Deep in the humid lowlands of the Mexican Gulf Coast, the 19th century brought reports from travelers of impossible stone faces staring from the jungle floor. These were not the intricate reliefs of the Maya known from sites like Palenque. They were something far more primal and monumental, colossal heads sculpted from single blocks of basalt, some standing nearly 10 feet tall and weighing over 20 tons. Each one is a portrait of a distinct individual, with full, rounded features, broad noses, and thick lips, each crowned with a unique, close-fitting helmet, perhaps representing the protective gear worn in the ritual ball game. To stumble upon one in the dense greenery is to confront a powerful, silent presence, a ruler or deity made permanent in stone, guarding secrets for over 2,500 years. These heads are the signature legacy of the Olmec civilization, a culture that flourished from around 1,500 to 400 years before the Common Era. Before their discovery, the prevailing academic view was clear. The Maya, with their elaborate calendar, towering pyramids, and hieroglyphic writing, were considered the first great civilization of Mesoamerica, the pioneers of complexity in the region. The Olmec heads and the sprawling ceremonial centers like San Lorenzo and La Venta that accompanied them shattered that timeline. Here was evidence of a society that had achieved a staggering level of organization and artistic skill centuries, even a full millennium before the classic Maya period reached its height. The Olmecs are now widely recognized as the mother culture of Mesoamerica. Their influence is a blueprint found in the foundations of all later societies. They developed a sophisticated trade network that spanned hundreds of miles, sourcing the basalt for their colossal heads from distant mountains and moving the multi-ton blocks without the wheel or draft animals, likely using rafts along rivers and immense human labor. They constructed vast earthen pyramids and complex urban layouts aligned with celestial events. Most intriguingly, they may have given the Americas its first writing, evidenced by symbols on cylinder seals and the cascadule block, a stone slab with a sequence of distinct glyphs. The artistic sophistication of the heads themselves is a direct window into early social hierarchy. To command the resources to quarry, transport, and sculpt a single head required a society with a powerful central authority, specialized artisans, and a large, coordinated labor force. Each head is believed to represent a specific ruler, deifying political power in a way that would become a template for every Mesoamerican king that followed. This discovery did more than just add an earlier chapter. It completely redefined the cultural chronology of an entire continent, proving that the seeds of civilization in the Americas were planted not in the Maya highlands or the Aztec Valley, but in these swampy coastal plains. The colossal heads ask us a profound question about legacy. How is it that a civilization so foundational could fade so completely from memory, leaving only these immense, stoic faces as its signature? They remind us that history is not merely recorded by those who write, but is often written largest by those who build, their silent monuments waiting for the jungle to part and reveal the true origins of a world. A library in the early 20th century holds a book that should not exist. Its pages are vellum, its binding unassuming, but opening it reveals a world of profound mystery. This is the Voynich manuscript, a codex carbon dated to the early 1400s, filled from edge to edge with a flowing, elegant script that no one on earth can read. Alongside the text are illustrations of a reality just out of reach, plants with bulbous roots and leaves that resemble no known botany, intricate charts of celestial bodies in unfamiliar arrangements, and pages filled with what appear to be tiny, naked women bathing in a system of interconnected green pools. Since its rediscovery by the Polish book dealer Wilfrid Voynich in 1912, this object has become the holy grail of historical cryptography, defying every attempt at a solution. The theories about its origin are as varied as its strange imagery. Some of the world's top codebreakers, including teams from both world wars who cracked enemy ciphers, have turned their skills to its pages and walked away baffled. Is it an elaborate, meaningless hoax crafted to deceive a wealthy patron? Is it a pharmacopoeia written in a lost language, recording herbal knowledge from a now-vanished culture? Could it be a sophisticated cipher, hiding alchemical or astronomical secrets its author dared not write plainly? The very fact that modern computational analysis shows its text has the complex statistical patterns of a real language, not random gibberish, deepens the enigma. This book does not rewrite a specific timeline of kings or battles. Its power is more subtle and in some ways more profound. It challenges the foundational assumption that we can, with enough effort, fully understand the past. The Voynich manuscript stands as a stark, physical reminder that history is not merely the story of what was written down and preserved for us to find. It is also the story of what was written down and intentionally obscured, or recorded in a personal shorthand that died with its author. It forces historians to confront the possibility of entire streams of esoteric, private, or specialized knowledge that flowed through the medieval world, knowledge meant only for a select few initiates, which has now evaporated into silence. Think of an apothecary's private notes on experimental remedies, an astronomer's speculative charts of hypothetical constellations, or a noblewoman's encrypted diary. These were the intimate, unpublished thoughts of their age, and most have turned to dust. The Voynich manuscript is the one that did not. It survived, a locked door in the middle of the library of human knowledge. Its enduring mystery asks us a humbling question that echoes beyond its pages. In our confidence about reconstructing the medieval mind, how many other manuscripts sit on museum shelves, labeled and catalogued, holding secrets we look at but cannot see? This artifact teaches us that some discoveries are not about finding answers, but about learning to respect the depth of the questions we have yet to ask. The Voynich manuscript is a locked door, but some messages are written so large they can only be seen from the sky. Across 500 square miles of the arid Peruvian desert, the Nazca people etched a gallery of colossal art into the very crust of the earth. Between roughly 500 years before the Common Era and 500 years after, they removed the dark, sun-baked surface stones to reveal the lighter-colored soil beneath, creating lines that form staggering shapes. A hummingbird with wings outstretched over 300 feet, a spider nearly 150 feet long, a twisting monkey with a spiraled tail, and precise geometric forms like trapezoids and spirals that stretch for miles. These are the Nazca lines, and their true impact only becomes clear when you leave the ground. From the desert floor, you see only shallow grooves and indistinct paths. But from the air, the perspective shifts entirely. The scattered fragments resolve into magnificent, coherent figures, a secret art show meant for a viewer far above the earth. This simple fact has fueled endless speculation. Were they landing strips for ancient astronauts, as some popular theories once suggested? The archaeological consensus points to a far more profound, human-centered explanation. The prevailing view connects the lines to water, the most precious and elusive resource in that harsh landscape. Many of the lines point toward distant mountains that capture seasonal rainfall, and some of the animal figures are associated with water in Nazca mythology. Researchers like Johann Reinhard have argued they were part of a ceremonial practice, a form of prayer or offering to deities who controlled the rains and underground aquifers. Walking the lines could have been a spiritual pilgrimage, a way for the community to physically engage with their pleas for fertility and survival. The discovery of new, smaller lines and patterns using drone technology in recent years has only amplified the scale of this cultural project. It was not a handful of drawings, but a vast, interconnected landscape of meaning that the Nazca modified over 1,000 years. This forces a dramatic reconsideration of the culture's capabilities. Creating such precise, large-scale designs required sophisticated knowledge of geometry and surveying. They likely used simple stakes and ropes to plot out the figures, scaling up smaller models with remarkable accuracy, a testament to communal planning and shared vision. The purpose was not practical in a modern sense, but it was vitally important. It speaks to a worldview where art, religion, and the environment were inseparable. The Nazca lines challenge any timeline that underestimates pre-Columbian South American societies, showing that complex symbolic thought and landscape engineering existed on a breathtaking scale, not for warfare or grand monuments to kings, but for dialogue with the forces of nature. They ask us, what does a society value so deeply that it would mobilize generations to write it across the earth itself? The answer is not in gold or conquest, but in a simple, enduring plea for life, drawn so large it could only be read by the sky. A ghost ship rests beneath a quiet field in Suffolk, England. In the tense summer of 1939, as the world stood on the brink of war, an archaeologist named Basil Brown made a careful cut into a large earthen mound. His trowel revealed not just soil but the dark stain of ancient wood, tracing the elegant, sweeping lines of a clinker-built vessel. This was no mere grave. It was a ship burial, a 90-foot-long Anglo-Saxon ship interred whole to carry a powerful leader into the afterlife around the early 600s. The treasures found within its central chamber were nothing short of a historical revelation. There was a ceremonial helmet of iron and bronze. Its face masked a fierce, mustached visage with garnet eyes, a symbol of authority that has become an icon of the era. There was a magnificent gold belt buckle, intricately patterned, and a purse lid shimmering with cloisonné garnets. There were Byzantine silver bowls from the Eastern Mediterranean, silver spoons, and lavish jewelry that showed clear artistic links to Scandinavia. This was the Sutton Hoo ship burial, and its impact was to shatter a centuries-old historical narrative. For generations, the period following the Roman withdrawal from Britain was labeled the Dark Ages, a term implying cultural decline, poverty, and isolation. The Sutton Hoo treasure told a completely different story. Here was staggering wealth and breathtaking artistry, evidence of a sophisticated elite with the means and the vision to stage a funerary spectacle of epic proportions. The objects were not locally made trinkets, they were a map of influence written in gold and garnet. The Byzantine silver spoke of trade networks that stretched across Europe to Constantinople. The Scandinavian-style jewelry hinted at shared cultural roots and ongoing contact across the North Sea. This was not an isolated, backward society. It was a connected player in a wider European world, engaging in diplomacy, trade, and the exchange of ideas. The individual buried here, likely a king of East Anglia such as Riedwald, was not a petty warlord in a ruined land. He was a figure of international stature, his status proclaimed through objects that would have been recognized and respected from the Baltic to the Mediterranean. Basil Brown's meticulous excavation forced historians to revise the entire timeline of post-Roman British society. It pushed the emergence of powerful, wealthy Anglo-Saxon kingdoms earlier and painted them in a far more complex light. The so-called Dark Ages were, in fact, an age of brilliant craftsmanship, long-distance exchange, and vibrant cultural fusion. How does such a find illuminate the interconnectedness of ancient Europe? It proves that even in an era with fewer written records, people, goods, and ideas were in constant motion. A king in an English field could dine with silver from Istanbul and be buried with art inspired by Swedish workshops. Sutton, who asks us to listen to the stories told by objects, for they often reveal a world far more traveled and cosmopolitan than the old stories ever allowed. The glittering treasures of Sutton, who spoke of a world connected by trade, but a discovery in the dust of a ruined palace revealed a mind connected across millennia. In the middle of the 19th century, archaeologists excavating the ancient Assyrian capital of Nineveh, in what is now Iraq, uncovered a series of rooms that had been utterly destroyed by fire. The ceilings had collapsed, and within the debris they found not ash and charcoal, but a library. The fire that had consumed the palace around 612 years before the Common Era had ironically preserved its greatest treasure. The intense heat had baked the thousands of clay tablets stored within, hardening them into durable ceramic. This was the library of Ashurbanipal, the last great king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a man who prided himself not just as a conqueror, but as a scholar king who actively collected the written knowledge of his world. The scale was staggering, a collection of over 30,000 tablets and fragments, each inscribed in the precise, wedge-shaped cuneiform script. This was not a random assortment of administrative records, though those were present. It was a deliberate, curated archive of an entire civilization's intellectual output. Among the tablets, researchers found something that would rewrite the literary history of the world, the Epic of Gilgamesh. This was not a fragment or a later copy. Here was the most complete version of the epic, a sweeping narrative about a legendary king's quest for immortality, his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, and his confrontation with the profound truth of human mortality. The poem contained a flood story so strikingly similar to the later biblical account of Noah that it sent shockwaves through theological and academic circles. It proved that these powerful narrative themes, these explorations of friendship, loss, and the human condition, were being composed and refined over 1,000 years before Homer wrote the Iliad or the Odyssey. The library's contents went far beyond literature. It was a repository of advanced scientific and medical knowledge. There were detailed astronomical observations used for divination, meticulous lists of medicinal plants and their uses, and even what we might call early veterinary manuals. One text described a surgical procedure for treating a specific eye condition, showing a methodical approach to healing. This forced a dramatic recalibration of the historical timeline for systematic knowledge. Before this discovery, the great libraries of the classical world, like Alexandria, were seen as the birthplaces of organized scholarship. Ashurbanipal's library proved that the impulse to collect, categorize, and study the world through writing was a sophisticated practice in Mesopotamia centuries, even millennia earlier. It showcased a civilization where complex thought, poetic narrative, and empirical observation were already deeply intertwined. The library's destruction and preservation offer a poignant metaphor for the fragility and endurance of knowledge. A single fire intended to erase an empire's power instead fossilized its mind. It makes you wonder, with a deep sense of loss, about all the other great libraries of antiquity, from Alexandria to the countless archives of the Indus Valley or early China, that turned to smoke and dust without a trace. What epic poems, what scientific insights, what entire philosophies have vanished, leaving only silence where there was once a chorus of ancient voices. This collection of baked clay asks us to consider what we today are choosing to preserve, and what stories might survive the collapse of our own world, waiting in the ruins to speak to a future age. High in the volcanic hills of West Java, a place known as Gunung Padang rises like a terraced pyramid from the lush Indonesian landscape. For local communities, it has long been a sacred site, its 5 ascending stone terraces a place of quiet reverence. To the eye of a conventional archaeologist a century ago, it appeared to be a fascinating but relatively recent megalithic complex, perhaps 2,000 or 3,000 years old, built by an early farming society. That initial assessment, however, has been thrown into a state of profound uncertainty by a series of controversial investigations beginning in the 2000s. Using subsurface imaging techniques like ground-penetrating radar and electrical resistivity tomography, researchers have proposed something astonishing. They suggest that what we see on the surface is merely the topmost layer of a much older structure. Core drills have brought up samples of compacted stone and soil from deep within the hill, and some of the carbon dating from these samples points to human activity potentially stretching back over 20,000 years. That is a date deep in the last ice age, a time when our species was supposedly comprised of small, mobile bands of hunter-gatherers, focused on survival in a changing world. The claim is staggering. If validated, it would mean that Gunung Padang is not just an old site, but potentially the oldest known megalithic structure on Earth, a terraced pyramid built millennia before Göbekli Tepe, and a full 15,000 years before the first stones were laid at Stonehenge. The implications would force a complete rewrite of human prehistory in Southeast Asia and beyond. It suggests that in the deep Paleolithic era, groups of people possessed not only the social organization to undertake a massive, multi-generational construction project, but also the sophisticated knowledge of stoneworking and possibly even celestial alignment. Could a society without agriculture, without metal tools, have intentionally shaped an entire hill into a geometric, terraced monument? The debate within the scientific community is intense and essential. Many geologists and archaeologists urge extreme caution, pointing out that the hill's natural columnar basalt formations could be mistaken for worked stone, and that the carbon-dated materials might have been shifted by natural geological processes over millennia. They argue that extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and that the standard protocols of archaeological stratigraphy, carefully excavating one clear layer at a time, must be followed to draw any firm conclusions. This rigorous skepticism is not a dismissal, but a vital part of the scientific process. It ensures that our timeline is rewritten by facts, not by fervent hope. Yet, even amidst the controversy, Gunung Padang represents something crucial. It embodies the cutting edge of chronological challenge, a site that asks the most difficult questions of our established models. How do we, as a global community of inquiry, approach a discovery that seems to defy everything we thought we knew? The answer lies in patience, in meticulous excavation, and in welcoming the debate itself as a sign of a healthy, evolving science. This hill in Java, whether 20,000 years old or 2,000, forces us to hold two ideas in tension at once: our current understanding of human capability and the thrilling, unsettling possibility that we have only begun to scratch the surface of our own deep past. A slab of ancient sandstone lies hidden beneath a protective layer of earth and turf in a Scottish field. This is the Cochno stone, a massive panel nearly 40 feet across, and its surface is a dense tapestry of mystery. Carefully uncovered by archaeologists in the 1930s, only to be reburied decades later for its own preservation, it holds one of the most spectacular collections of prehistoric art in all of Europe. Etched into the rock around 5,000 years ago are hundreds of precise, intricate symbols, deep cup marks surrounded by concentric rings, wandering grooves, and elegant spirals that seem to pulse with a silent rhythm. To stand before it is to look at a language without a dictionary, a map to a place we can no longer locate. These are not random scratches. The repetition of the cup and ring motif, found on thousands of stones across Britain and Ireland, speaks to a shared visual vocabulary that spanned vast distances. This forces a dramatic shift in how we view the so-called simple farmers of the Bronze Age. Historians once saw this era primarily through the lens of technological advancement, the mastery of metal. The Cochno stone and its countless cousins tell a different story. They reveal societies deeply engaged with symbol, pattern, and possibly celestial observation. Some researchers note the patterns may chart lunar cycles or solar events, turning the landscape itself into a permanent calendar or observatory. Others see them as markers for sacred sites, portals for ritual, or maps of ancestral territories. Their true meaning may forever hover just beyond our grasp, but their collective impact is undeniable. They prove that the human need for abstract expression, for encoding meaning into the world, flourished long before the invention of writing. This pushes the timeline for complex symbolic communication in Northern Europe back by millennia. The stones were not just art, they were a medium. They connected communities across generations, a durable message board for spiritual ideas, communal identity, and an understanding of humanity's place within the cosmos. The Cochno stone asks us a silent, potent question. What stories did these carvings tell around the fireside? What promises, what prayers, what knowledge of the stars did they hold fast against the rain and the years? This canvas of ancient thought reminds us that history is recorded not only in words, but in the universal language of mark and meaning, patiently waiting for us to learn how to read the land itself. The ancient cup and ring marks of Scotland speak of a landscape shaped by human hands, but that impulse to inscribe meaning onto the earth reaches its most dramatic scale beneath the green canopy of another continent. For centuries, the prevailing narrative of the Amazon basin was one of pristine, untouched wilderness, a vast, impenetrable jungle where only small, nomadic tribes could exist in harmony with an unforgiving environment. This was the Green Desert Theory, a view that shaped exploration and history books alike, suggesting the Amazon could never have supported the large, settled populations that built civilizations elsewhere in the Americas. That entire story has been erased by lines in the earth, seen not from the ground but from the sky. The twin forces of modern deforestation and revolutionary LiDAR technology have peeled back the forest's veil. LiDAR, which stands for light detection and ranging, works by firing millions of laser pulses from an aircraft down through the canopy. These pulses bounce back, creating a staggeringly detailed three-dimensional map of the ground surface beneath the leaves, stripping away the vegetation to reveal the naked topography. What it has revealed across vast stretches of Brazil and Bolivia is nothing short of a lost geography. There are not just a few curious mounds, there are hundreds, perhaps thousands, of precise geometric earthworks, intricate patterns of squares, circles, and octagons formed by deep ditches and tall embankments. These are the Amazonian geoglyphs, and they date from roughly 2,000 to 500 years ago. Imagine flying over what appears to be an unbroken sea of green, only for your instrument screen to light up with the ghostly outline of a perfect circle 1,000 feet across, or a complex series of connected avenues, all hidden just below the treetops. This is the work led by researchers like Heiko Prumers, whose surveys have transformed our understanding. These were not temporary camps. They are the signature of complex, settled societies that managed the rainforest on a grand scale. The geoglyphs themselves, likely used for ceremonial gatherings, are only part of the story. The surrounding landscape shows evidence of sophisticated agroforestry. This was not slash-and-burn agriculture, but a kind of forest gardening. These communities enriched the soil, creating patches of incredibly fertile ground known as terra preta, or black earth, by deliberately mixing charcoal, pottery shards, and organic waste into the land. They cultivated useful trees, creating what were essentially food forests that provided sustenance while maintaining the canopy. They built extensive networks of roads and canals, connecting settlements and managing the wetland environment. The Amazon, it turns out, was not a wilderness that resisted civilization. It was a homeland that sustained it, a managed, productive landscape shaped over generations. This forces a seismic shift in the timeline of New World civilizations. We can no longer relegate the Amazon to a footnote, a blank space on the map between the Andes and the coast. It must be integrated as a major, independent cradle of cultural development, with its own timeline of social complexity that parallels and interacts with the better-known civilizations of the Maya or the Inca. The scale of the earthworks suggests populations that were far larger and more interconnected than ever dreamed. So how did these societies thrive, and what happened to them? Their success was built on a profound, intimate knowledge of the rainforest's ecology, turning a challenge into a resource. Their disappearance, however, remains one of the great puzzles. The leading theory points not to ecological collapse, but to the same cataclysm that devastated indigenous populations across the Americas, the arrival of European colonizers after 1492. Waves of unfamiliar illnesses against which these communities had no immunity likely swept through these populations with catastrophic speed, leading to societal fragmentation long before European explorers ever set foot in their managed forests. The geoglyphs, then, are more than archaeological curiosities. They are the last testament of a lost way of life, a model of sustainable living etched into the very earth. They ask us to reconsider every assumption about what a civilization looks like and where it can flourish, proving that some of humanity's greatest achievements were not monuments of stone, but a harmonious, lasting dialogue with the living world. A single piece of linen measuring 14 feet by 3 rests in a cathedral in Turin, Italy. It is known as the Shroud of Turin, and its surface bears the faint, haunting imprint of a man who appears to have endured physical hardship. For many of the faithful, this image is a sacred relic, a tangible connection to a profound moment in spiritual history. For scientists and historians, it is one of the most complex and controversial puzzles ever placed on the examination table. The central question is direct. Is this the actual burial cloth of a historical figure from the 1st century, or is it an artifact from a later period? The debate has raged for generations, but it reached a pivotal moment in the late 1980s. With permission from the Vatican, small samples of the cloth were removed and sent to 3 independent laboratories at the University of Oxford, the University of Arizona, and the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. Using accelerator mass spectrometry, a refined form of radiocarbon dating, each lab analyzed the linen fibers. Their results, published in 1989, converged on a startling conclusion. The flax plants used to weave the shroud most likely grew between 1260 and 1390 of the Common Era. This medieval date seemed to settle the matter for many in the scientific community, placing the cloth's origin squarely in the Middle Ages, a time when the creation and veneration of religious relics was a widespread practice. Yet the story did not end there. Proponents of the shroud's authenticity raised significant questions about the testing process itself. They pointed out that the sample taken came from a corner of the cloth that had been handled, mended, and possibly contaminated over centuries by smoke, water, and the oils from countless human hands. Could a medieval repair or even a buildup of bacterial biofilm on the threads have skewed the carbon dating results, making a much older object appear younger? This scientific impasse is where the shroud's true historical lesson emerges. It forces a deep and necessary conversation about the methodology of history itself. How do we authenticate an object that exists at the precise intersection of faith and material evidence? The shroud challenges the limits of our tools. Radiocarbon dating is powerful, but it is not infallible, especially when applied to an organic artifact with such a complex conservation history. The debate highlights the immense difficulty of obtaining a perfectly pristine sample from an object that has been the focus of intense human devotion for so long. Beyond the science, the shroud's enduring power lies in its role as a cultural artifact. For over 600 years, regardless of its scientific dating, it has been a focal point for pilgrimage, prayer, and profound personal reflection. It speaks to a universal human desire, the longing for a physical connection to the narratives that shape our understanding of the world. This desire to touch the past, to have an object that makes a story feel real, is a historical force in its own right. It drove the medieval relic trade, inspired the construction of great cathedrals, and continues to draw millions to sites of historical significance today. The Shroud of Turin, therefore, is more than a mystery to be solved. It is a perfect case study in the complexity of historical evidence. It shows that an object's meaning is woven from multiple threads, the chemical composition of its fibers, the documented history of its ownership, and the intangible layer of belief and tradition that surrounds it. What can such a controversial artifact teach us? It teaches humility. It reminds us that our interpretation of the past is always a conversation between cold data and the warm, human need for meaning. A conversation where the final answer is often less important than the profound questions we are compelled to ask along the way. A lost empire can vanish from memory, only to be rebuilt word by word from a mountain of clay. In the rocky highlands of central Turkey, the sprawling ruins of Hattusa lay silent for millennia, their true identity shrouded in local legend. When systematic excavations began in the early 20th century, archaeologists uncovered more than a forgotten city. They found the imperial capital of the Hittites, a civilization that flourished from around 1,600 to 1,180 years before the Common Era. The scale was breathtaking. The city's walls snaked over the landscape for miles, punctuated by monumental gateways like the Lion Gate, where massive stone felines stood eternal, silent guardians. Within these defenses lay temples, palaces, and vast storehouses. Yet the true treasure was not in the architecture, but in a single, fire-hardened archive room. Here, excavators discovered thousands of cuneiform tablets, a bureaucratic mountain of treaties, legal codes, diplomatic letters, and religious texts. Before this discovery, the Hittites were a ghost, a name mentioned in passing in the Hebrew Bible and in a few Egyptian records, often as a distant, shadowy people. These clay tablets gave them a voice. They revealed a complex, sophisticated empire that stood as an equal to Egypt and Babylon. One of the most astounding finds was a copy of the Treaty of Kadesh, a peace accord signed around 1285 years before the Common Era between the Hittite king Hattusili III and the Egyptian pharaoh Rameses II. This was not just a historical footnote, it was the earliest known surviving peace treaty in human history, a document that spoke of diplomacy and recognized parity between two superpowers. The archives proved the Hittites were not a minor tribe, but a centralized state with a codified legal system, a pantheon of deities, and a network of influence that stretched across Anatolia and into the Levant. This forced a dramatic and immediate revision of the ancient Near Eastern timeline. Historians could no longer view the Bronze Age as a simple duel between Egypt and Mesopotamia. A third major player had to be inserted, permanently altering the political and cultural map. The recovery of Hattusa filled a cavernous gap, showing that the crossroads of the ancient world was a three-way conversation. It revealed a vibrant exchange of ideas, technologies, and goods flowing between the Nile, the Tigris and Euphrates, and the Anatolian plateau. How does the recovery of a lost empire change the map? It does more than add a new color. It redraws all the borders of influence and rewrites the story of conflict and cooperation. It turns a binary narrative into a complex web, reminding us that history is not just about the civilizations that endured in memory, but about those that fell into silence, waiting for their archives to be read again in the light of a new age. The seafloor off the Egyptian coast is a museum of the lost. For over 1,000 years, the great port city of Heracleion, known to the Egyptians as Thonis, existed only as a footnote in ancient texts. Herodotus wrote of its temple where the legendary Helen of Troy sought refuge. It was the mandatory gateway to Egypt for all Greek trade, a place where cultures and customs merged before goods ever reached the Nile. Then, sometime in the 2nd century before the Common Era, it vanished. The land simply gave way, a combination of rising sea levels, a sudden collapse of the unstable sediment on which it was built, and perhaps a major seismic event, caused the entire city to sink beneath the waters of the Mediterranean. It became a legend, a story of a place that slipped beneath the waves. That legend became reality in the year 2000, when a team led by marine archaeologist Frank Gaudio, working from clues in ancient texts and systematic geophysical surveys, finally pinpointed its resting place. What they found was not a scatter of broken pottery. It was a city frozen in time, preserved in the silent, dark embrace of the sea. The excavation that followed was a slow, careful dance with history. Divers descended not into murky obscurity, but into a ghostly metropolis. Their lights illuminated colossal statues of a pharaoh and a queen, each standing over 15 feet tall, carved from red granite, their royal faces gazing upward through the water as if waiting for the sun. Nearby, a massive stone stele, a decree of Pharaoh Nectanebo I, lay perfectly intact, its inscription still sharp. They found hundreds of anchor stones, ritual barges, delicate gold jewelry, and the everyday coins and weights of merchants, all lying where they fell. The sheer density and quality of the finds were overwhelming. This was not a city in decline when it sank. It was a thriving, wealthy, and vital hub. The discovery forced an immediate and dramatic revision of Egyptian and Greek history. Before Heracleion was found, historians knew it was important from texts, but they could not gauge its true scale or its role as the primary customs checkpoint for an entire empire. The physical evidence proved it was the indispensable linchpin in a vast economic network. Every ship from the Greek world had to stop here, have its cargo registered, and pay a tax before proceeding up the Nile to Naucratis and beyond. The city was also a profound religious center. The temples and statues revealed a deep fusion of Egyptian and Greek deities, a place where two spiritual worlds met and blended long before Alexander the Great ever set foot in Egypt. This sunken archive provides the material proof for a level of cultural exchange and bureaucratic control that texts alone could only hint at, but Heracleion offers a lesson far beyond trade routes. Its fate is a stark, physical record of environmental change and urban vulnerability. The city was built on the shifting, watery soil of the Nile Delta, a location chosen for its perfect access to the sea. For centuries, its engineers adapted, building on reinforced foundations. Yet, they were ultimately building on a foundation that could not hold. The city's disappearance was likely a slow-motion catastrophe, with buildings gradually settling and streets flooding over generations, until a final, catastrophic event sealed its fate. This forces us to ask a pressing question about resilience. How many of our own great coastal cities, built on reclaimed land or unstable ground, are making similar long-term bargains with geography? Heraclean is a reminder that the environment is not just a backdrop for history, but an active participant. Its silent statues and toppled temples are a monument to human ambition and a warning about the ground we choose to build upon. It brings a legend into breathtaking reality, only to show us that the most solid of stones can be reclaimed by the sea, leaving behind a story written not on papyrus, but in the quiet sand of the seabed. The quiet act of marking a shell may hold the first whisper of a revolution. In the fertile plains of China's Henan province, at a Neolithic site known as Jiahu, archaeologists uncovered a collection of artifacts that seemed to hum with unspoken meaning. These were not grand statues or golden treasures, but something far more intimate: tortoise shells and animal bones, some dating back to around 6,600 years before the Common Era. Etched onto their surfaces are a series of simple, deliberate markings. To the untrained eye, they might resemble random scratches or decorative patterns. But to researchers like those who have studied them, they bear a startling resemblance to later Chinese characters used for divination during the Shang dynasty, thousands of years later. One particular symbol, found repeatedly, looks remarkably like the modern Chinese character for eye. Another seems to prefigure the word for sun. This discovery at Jiahu sends a quiet tremor through the established timeline of human invention. For over a century, the consensus held that writing was invented independently in only a few places. Mesopotamia with its cuneiform around 3,200 years before the Common Era, Egypt with its hieroglyphs shortly after, and later in China with the oracle bone script of the Shang dynasty around 1,200 years before the Common Era. The Jiahu symbols, if they are indeed a primitive form of writing, would push the origins of Chinese script back by more than 5,000 years, placing it in an era when communities were just beginning to settle into agricultural life. This forces a profound and difficult question. What exactly defines writing? Is it a simple tally mark, a property symbol on a pot, a ritual sign carved by a spiritual leader? Or does it require a full system with consistent signs that can represent both objects and sounds, capable of recording complex speech and abstract thought? The markings at Jiahu exist in a tantalizing gray area. They are not a lengthy text. They are isolated symbols often found in burial contexts, suggesting they may have served a ritual or divinatory purpose. Picture a community elder, perhaps a shaman, carefully incising a symbol onto a tortoise shell before placing it in a grave, a silent prayer or protective charm for the journey ahead. This was not literature or history. It may have been a sacred act, a bridge between the human world and the unseen. Yet that very act could have been the seed from which a mighty tree of language grew. This discovery challenges the old, linear model of cultural progress, where one civilization invents an idea and it spreads outward. Instead, it suggests a slower, more organic process. The human drive to encode meaning may have flickered in countless places for millennia, in the cup and ring marks of Scotland, in the symbols on the cascadal block of the Olmecs, and on these humble shells in China. These early marks were not yet a full writing system, but they were a crucial step, a cognitive leap from depicting an object to assigning it a symbolic value understood by a community. The story of writing, therefore, may not be a single invention with a clear date and place, but a gradual awakening, a dawning recognition that a mark could hold a thought, and that thought could be passed across time and space. The silent symbols of Jaya who ask us to listen more carefully to the faintest echoes from our past. They remind us that the greatest revolutions often begin not with a shout, but with a careful, curious scratch on a shell, a moment where meaning was first entrusted to something outside the human mind, waiting patiently in the dark earth to be read again. A curious hammer rests in a Texas museum, sealed within a casing of ancient-looking stone. In 1936, near the town of London, Texas, a couple hiking along a creek bed noticed a peculiar piece of rock with what appeared to be a piece of wood protruding from it. Breaking it open, they found a hammerhead made of iron, still attached to its partially fossilized wooden handle. The rock surrounding it was identified as a Cretaceous limestone concretion, a type of stone that typically forms around a nucleus, and this geological layer dates to roughly 100 million years ago. The immediate and startling implications seem to defy all logic. How could a clearly human-made tool, with its recognizable wooden handle and metal head, become encased in rock from an era when dinosaurs still roamed the earth? This object, known as the London Hammer, quickly became a legendary example of what enthusiasts call an out-of-place artifact, or OOP art. The image it conjures is powerful, a solitary discoverer holding a tangible contradiction, a piece of the modern world impossibly trapped in deep time. It sparks a thrilling narrative of lost civilizations or even visitors from elsewhere, a story that challenges the entire geological column. Yet the scientific explanation, while less sensational, is a crucial lesson in how nature and human activity can intertwine in misleading ways. Most geologists and archaeologists point to a far more plausible process. The hammer, they suggest, is not ancient at all. It could be a miner's or carpenter's tool from the 19th century, perhaps lost or discarded. The creek where it was found carries minerals dissolved in its water. Over a relatively short period, perhaps decades or a few centuries, these minerals can precipitate out, cementing surrounding sediments into a hard, rock-like concretion around any object that serves as a nucleus. In this case, the nucleus was an iron hammer with a wooden handle. The resulting stone shell can look incredibly old, mimicking the appearance of much more ancient formations. This does not make the find any less fascinating, but it shifts the mystery from one of timeline to one of process. The London Hammer forces a vital discussion about evidence and interpretation. It reminds historians and archaeologists of their dual responsibility. On one hand, they must maintain rigorous standards of analysis, applying Occam's razor, the principle that the simplest explanation with the fewest assumptions is usually correct. They must test claims against established, repeatable knowledge from geology, chemistry, and physics. On the other hand, they must remain genuinely open to legitimate surprises, to those rare pieces of evidence that could signal a true paradigm shift. The challenge is to tell the difference. The hammer's story highlights how powerfully such objects capture the public imagination. They resonate because they offer a simple, physical challenge to complex, established sequences. They feel like keys that could unlock forbidden doors. This public fascination is not a problem, it is an opportunity. It is a sign of a deep, shared curiosity about our origins. The responsibility for scientists, then, is not to dismiss such finds with contempt, but to engage with them transparently, to explain the methods used to date materials and contextualize artifacts. They must show their work. When an object like the London Hammer appears, the scientific process demands a careful disassembly of the mystery, not a defensive rejection. It requires testing the concretion, analyzing the metallurgy of the iron, and studying the cell structure of the wood to determine its age and origin. Often, as with this hammer, the investigation leads back to a more recent, yet still compelling, story of natural chemistry and human loss. But the possibility remains that one day, an anomalous artifact will withstand every test and force a real rewrite. This is the balance at the heart of discovery, a cautionary tale about the evidence we find and the stories we choose to build upon it. What looks like a door to another world may simply be a reflection in a pool of water, but we must always be willing to walk up and check. From the silent temples of Göbekli Tepe to the geometric earthworks hidden beneath the Amazon canopy, these 25 discoveries are not isolated curiosities. They are individual threads in a single, much larger tapestry, one that tells a story of human history far richer, more interconnected, and more surprising than any single textbook could ever contain. Each artifact, from the humble marked shell to the colossal stone head, acts as a key, unlocking a door in a mansion of time we are only just beginning to explore. They collectively demonstrate that history is not a static record, but a living, breathing narrative constantly being rewritten by the spade, the scanner, and the persistent curiosity of those who dare to question the established story. The overarching theme that binds these finds together is not one of triumphant certainty, but of profound humility. For every confident timeline we draw, the Earth offers up a contradiction. A temple predates agriculture, a computer appears a millennium too early, a city thrives in a jungle we thought was empty. These are not errors to be corrected, but invitations to think more broadly. They force us to abandon simple, linear models of progress and embrace a world of stunning complexity, where ideas sparked independently across continents and societies rose to greatness on their own unique terms. They make us acknowledge the vast, silent gaps in our knowledge, the libraries that burned, the languages that fell silent, the cities that sank without a trace. Our map of the past is still mostly blank space, and every new discovery fills in a little more of the coastline of a forgotten continent. This journey through rewritten time does more than reshape our view of the past. It fundamentally alters our understanding of human potential and resilience. It shows us that the drive to create meaning, to organize, to build, and to understand the cosmos is a deep and universal thread in the human story. Our ancestors were not primitive beings waiting to become us. They were ingenious adapters, brilliant engineers, and keen observers who shaped their worlds with the tools and beliefs they had. From the sustainable forest gardens of the Amazon to the celestial computers of the Hellenistic world, they solved problems, expressed beauty, and sought connection in ways that continue to astonish us. Their legacy is a testament not to a single path of advancement, but to the incredible diversity of human ingenuity. Let this exploration be an inspiration. Let it encourage you to look at the history presented in documentaries and books not as settled fact, but as the best current draft, always subject to revision. Look at the landscape around you with curious eyes. The field, the riverbank, the city lot, each holds layers of time. The next great discovery that forces historians to rethink everything might not be in a remote desert or a deep jungle. It might be waiting just beneath your feet, a silent piece of evidence ready to tell its story and add a new, unexpected chapter to the grand, unfinished book of us. Thank you for joining this journey through the mysteries that reshape our past. If you found these revelations as fascinating as we do, please subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten corners of history. And we would love to hear from you. Which one of these 25 discoveries amazed you the most, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments below.